Hello, this week we will put recent U.S. trade policy in historical context. Tariffs are taxes on imports. For much of U.S. history, tariffs were the main source of revenue for the federal government, which played a much smaller role in the economy before programs like Social Security and Medicare existed. Alexander Hamilton argued that tariffs could help the young republic develop into an industrial and urban country. Without protection of tariffs, he argued that our infant industries would not be able to compete with Britain's world-leading manufacturing. U.S. agricultural interests generally opposed tariffs. They relied on exporting crops, and tariffs raised their costs for manufactured goods like farm equipment. Political coalitions were different in the 19th century. The Democrats, who were strongest in the South and West, generally opposed tariffs, while the Republicans, who predominated in the industrial Northeast, tended to support higher tariffs. Following the U.S. Constitution, tariffs were set through laws passed by Congress. The negotiations would involve exchanging of support for tariffs desired by different members with their various industries in their districts, a process sometimes called log rolling. A significant increase in tariffs came with the Smoot-Hawley Tariff of 1930. This took effect just as the world economy was sliding into depression. Many of our trading partners retaliated by raising their own tariffs. Though this did not cause the depression, it is generally seen as having made it worse. The turning point for U.S. trade policy then came with the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act of 1934. This gave the president authority to negotiate trade agreements limiting tariffs, subject to congressional ratification. In 1948, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT, came into effect. This is a multilateral agreement among the United States and 22 other countries to reduce tariffs. A pillar of the GATT was the Most Favored Nation clause. If a GATT member agreed to reduce tariffs on imports from one trading partner, it would extend the same treatment to all other GATT members. Through the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, GATT membership expanded, and it provided the framework for successive negotiating rounds, which reduced tariffs. One of those negotiating rounds led to the establishment of the World Trade Organization in 1995. The WTO was broader in scope than the GATT and included a stronger mechanism to resolve trade disputes. Countries who felt like a trading partner was violating its obligations could initiate a dispute at the WTO, which would convene consultations and, if the parties failed to work it out, a panel to hear the case. The losing party would then have the option to appeal the panel ruling to the WTO appellate body, in essence, the Supreme Court of World Trade. The authority of the WTO is ultimately somewhat limited. The winning party in a trade dispute would be authorized to implement retaliatory trade measures, but it cannot force a country to comply with its obligations. The GATT and WTO rules included an exception to the Most Favored Nation principle for free trade agreements where a group of countries would agree to eliminate tariffs amongst themselves. The original reason for this exception was to allow for what later became the European Union, but it also allowed the US, Mexico, and Canada to enter into the North American Free Trade Agreement in 1994. After the 1990s, the political momentum for trade liberalization seemed to wane. The need to reach consensus among a larger number of countries made further multilateral trade liberalization under the WTO increasingly difficult. China entered the WTO in December 2001, and concerns about how trade with China affected income distribution in the United States contributed to a cooling of support for trade in the US. In January 2017, the U.S. pulled out of a trade agreement, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that it had negotiated with other Pacific Rim countries, partly to be a counterweight to China. Over the years, Congress has created a number of authorities for the executive branch to impose tariffs. These were invoked to impose tariffs on imports from China in 2018 and 2019, as well as tariffs on steel and aluminum. The U.S. blocked appointments to the WTO appellate body, and it has lacked a quorum and been unable to resolve trade disputes since December 2019. So far in 2025, 25% tariffs on steel, aluminum, and automotive imports are being imposed. Executive authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act is now being invoked for much higher and more widespread tariffs announced by the president on April 2nd. These will bring U.S. tariffs back to levels not seen since the early 20th century. The Budget Lab at Yale estimates our average tariff rate will be 22.5%, up from 2.5% in 2024. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.